Okay, so welcome everybody, and thank you for joining this call. So the purpose of the call is to actually talk a little bit about the proposed bring your own API key feature for the Duo Chat various suite of features that use currently the Vertex and Anthropic models, basically externally. And GitLab currently uses their own. Hi, Susie. Use their own API keys for all the transactions. So the proposal is that we will give customers an option to provide their own API keys should they want to. That would apply for either self-managed .com or dedicated. Now there's definitely we can definitely have some discussion about what we might do with this feature, what direction we might take it in. But I wanted to use the first part of this meeting to talk about the experience we had recently using the integrations framework. Oh, hi, Eduardo. To support GitGuardian using the integrations framework. And I'll just quickly do a really quick introduction for everyone who people don't know each other. So Marshall is in the incubation area. Igor is in source code. Shekhar is create stage. Patrick is also source code. And Susie is the PM of custom models and my counterpart. And Eduardo is also in incubation engineering. Is that correct? Or you're now in MLOps, Eduardo? Well, Eduardo's everywhere. So yeah. So Patrick, if you could just maybe take us through your experience with the integration framework and then also perhaps a bit of the code that you worked on.
Yeah, no problem. So integrating a framework is not super hard per se, but there is a lot of boilerplating to think about, like the documentation and stuff. But everything is actually explained in the documentation. I will send the link first and foremost of the integration of our integration framework, and is actually, as I said, is not super hard to use. I will share my screen and show you a little bit.
A quick note, I've attached that link to the epic or issue that Sean created.
Thank you, Igor.
Yeah, indeed. So yeah, that's the documentation, and the first order of business when you create an integration with the integration framework is to link it to create the model first and foremost, and in the integration folder. So like it was done here. I don't know if you guys see the whole code. There you go.
Patrick, sorry, before we deep dive the code, I was wondering if you could just kind of show us what the UI
okay.
Yeah, would look like, and then we can jump into code.
Yeah, okay. So this is how this is the index page for the integration, but let me show you how to get there. Maybe first and foremost, let's go to the main page.
It's always slow when you're doing a demo.
Yeah, always. So let me use a random project, because this is on my local machine. So you go to settings in a project, and then you can go to integration if you are an admin of the
it's the same
project.
It's the same page at the group level, right?
Yeah, it's the same in the group level.
And instance level as well. You can set it up at the instance level too.
Indeed. And here you can type whatever search whatever integration we have. We have a bunch. So let's just take Guardian. Maybe just go. Here we just have one field. We just needed an API token provided by the user. So I could type whatever in here, doesn't matter. And yeah, this is always here, like that you have to activate the integration. You can also disable it and always keep the data that were in the fields before.
So, may I ask a question, Patrick? So, if the customer doesn't do active, obviously it's not working, and then they can create, as part of this integration, you can create multiple fields, right? Without kind of going to the database directly.
Yeah. So active, this is all in the database, and even though you don't see it in here because it's a password, so it doesn't show it anymore. It has saved the API key I've given it. So
so some of our customers might have different key requirements. They might have only a key, or they might have an ID and a key or something. So we could support any combination of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me maybe I can show it in code. Here you have fields. So when you create an integration class, you just need to create the class because it's a polymorphic model. When you create the integration model, you can put your field requirements here, like this, like fields. Here is token is of type password, as I told you. That's why once we save it, we don't see it anymore. And you can give it a whole bunch of other specification that you can all find in the documentation too. So if you look here, we have these types for the fields. We have the text type, text area, password, checkbox, select. And all of those can have extra additional keys that you can use too, like checkbox has check label and stuff like that. It's all very well, like you can see here, it's all very well explained in the documentation. And if you have like combination of things that you might need, you might say like, okay, I need an API key. This one is required, but with this API key, I need another field. So you could do validation. I have to check where, but I've seen in the documentation that you could do validation. Yeah, here. So you could do validation on some keys, like, okay, if this API key is present, I need this other field. I think that's the question you was asking, or am I diverging?
No, I was actually asking more. That's very interesting, actually, the validation. But no, I was asking more like, I don't know exactly what our providers require, and in fact, we might, of course, go in the future to other providers, which they might just ask for a single field with a key, or they might have an ID and a key, or they might have 3 fields, or so we could support all those things fairly easily by adding in additional integrations. Yeah,
it can be supported very easily if, like I said, like validation needs to be done on it. It can be done and it's all afterwards in the logic of the model. You can do whatever you want with the keys you have set up. So this is not a problem.
Okay. And then do you want to just kind of walk us through some of the elements on the MR?
Yeah, so the most important things, this is auto-generated.
What's happening with those metrics? Like, what are they for?
This is auto-generated. If you try to push something with integration involved, it will ask you to run a command to build those metrics. But the pipeline will tell you which command you need to run to build those metrics up. So this is boilerplate. Also, the documentation here, the pipeline doesn't pass if it's not there. So this is also boilerplate. The most important things to me is really the model, what you do inside the model, and just and
And so this also exposes
link the model to the project,
and this
project.
also exposes the key with a GraphQL endpoint.
The GraphQL endpoint.
Sorry, what how do we then use the key? Yeah,
it's you can use it actually afterwards.
The execute, don't you call the execute?
Yeah,
the execute method, right? And then the execute method, depending on the event triggers.
Yeah, and the execute method, like it's right here, as you said. The execute method, you can place it wherever you want in the code. If you want to execute it through through a GraphQL interface, you can do it. If you want to execute it with an event, you can do it. It's whatever. It's really like versatile in that sense.
and then just I know there was a lot of other work required for Git Guardian because of the integration specific customer needs, but this part of it, like the base integration part, like what how much, if you had to do this exactly same, if you had to do this again for another integration, like what sort of effort do you think it would be to do another one?
How long?
How long? Yeah.
Knowing all the boilerplates, I would say half a day.
Okay, great. Okay, I was expecting to hear milestone, but I love half a day. That's brilliant.
Yeah, but it's
so definitely
depending on the logic.
Milestone. Yeah,
depending on the logic that needs to be done afterwards to really make the integration. But making the integration visible here, it's not difficult, and setting up all the fields and stuff like that is not really difficult.
Okay, wonderful. Does anyone have any questions for Patrick before we kind of move on to the next part of this call?
I do. I have a question. I'm just thinking about like from a product side of bring your own API key. Like what are those sort of things that like this setup can enable to like add value? Because of this, like with the bring your own key, essentially the customer is taking on all the compute costs. So like what are like, can we add in anything here, like in terms of managements that like maybe they can't use with like the GitLab provided keys? Like where like, is there additional permissions? Can we do like additional authentications? I don't know, encryption, like what is the like, what can we offer here?
So basically we are not forced, I would say, to use the data given by the user, or we are not forced to use an external API like we did with Git Guardian here. We can add whatever logic that needs to be done in the execute method once everything is set up right. So it's really up to what the product needs and what needs to be done. So it's really versatile in that sense. We don't really need to execute something outside of our product, even though it's made for that, but it's not really needed. It's not really required. Let me say it like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think a big value add is, I mean, like, this isn't really like relevant to the integrations framework in particular, but I think the overarching value add of like proxying the LLM provider calls is that it's wrapped in GitLab authentication, right? So if you're doing code suggestions, you can authenticate with an OAuth token or a personal access token. And I think the same will be true with AI agents. It's just much more convenient to do, like instead of managing like hard-coded API key credentials and distributing those to developers for stuff like Anthropic, you can just use personal access tokens or even better OAuth tokens.
And if I can just also add, by having this part of it in the Rails stack in a kind of already built part of the application, so this is essentially already built. It gives customers the ability to control their keys just with configuration data, right? Without having to do anything at the server level, without having to do anything Kubernetes, whatever, right? No more environment variables. But additionally, we can also consider, how can we expose, transactions, logging, auditing, and, if we then decide about, if we want to talk about costs and managing costs, we're already building cost frameworks for all sorts of traffic, and we could potentially, lock into that. But yeah, so that was, yeah.
I do think that like we and Shakar can probably speak to this better than anybody else on the call, but we kind of need to like zoom out and look at the architecture of this thing, because like I'm not sure, like this is a fine interface for configuring an integration, right? But what does the configuration look like? What are we configuring? Are we configuring a single LLM provider? Are we configuring like pointing to a self-managed instance of AI gateway? Like what's the scope? Because I think I would be hesitant to push all the config management into this, especially if they would be like separate integrations per LLM provider or something like that. Because like I think like if you're really trying to like scale a like AI gateway, right? You're going to want to do things like load balancing across multiple models. You might like want to configure LLM backends that like we don't officially support, or like we pseudo officially support, right? Just because there's so many of them and the list keeps growing. So yeah, I think we should zoom out a bit and say like, what are we configuring here? Is it, do we plan to let folks run their own instances of AI gateway and you integrate that here? Or are we just talking about like Anthropic API keys and integrating Anthropic specifically?
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think the scope of what we're talking about is just API keys. But I think, yeah, but yeah, we should, I mean, architecture is definitely the most interesting part of this. Like we need to figure that out first. And this definitely accelerates the UI journey, I think, in the model and the API and stuff like that, certainly. But yeah, we need to figure out how this kind of ties into the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're both great points, and I think that like maybe the original kind of vision for this was just to allow customers, if and I guess we probably need to validate this aspect as well. It's an assumption is there are some customers who would like to use their own API keys for the Anthropic, and then as we add other services, but yeah, by extension, is this then the right place to put this if we start talking about all these other different types of models as well?
I think there's a lot of value for the simple cases here. So I don't think most customers will be willing to go really deep into, I don't know, managing their own infrastructure for them or anything. But suppose we are working on AI agents, and our AI agent just works on Anthropic now, and they think it would be better on OpenAI, or it would be better on whatever model, whatever provider, on a custom model on Hugging Face, for example. So you might pass just the link to query that model with the API key. Suddenly we have access to hundreds of different custom models that the user can choose on different platforms, right? Sure, over time some customers might want, and I think that's the job of the custom models team. A little bit part of the job of the custom models team to figure out how to provide for these cases. But we win a lot of like the 80% scenario by just relying on this, by just having API key, enabling access to API keys and letting users have the freedom of choosing which model they're gonna use in the end, right? So this is how I see.
I think the issue is around the quality, right? So we're talking about using these API keys as underlying source for the models for Duo features, right? And we don't want to sacrifice any quality for those features. So if we let people choose whatever model, we can't necessarily, at the stage that we will be working on how we can validate, like we may not be able to ensure that there is a quality feature, and like these features are going to have the GitLab brand on them. So we don't want to see a big tank in quality because someone chose a model from Hugging Face that isn't suited to purpose.
Yeah,
So I
so
think
so
there's-
for context
Absolutely.
though, like we're developing a separate feature called AI agents, and that feature is much more open-ended. In fact, like it's so open-ended that like someday we hope that Duo Chat will be integrated as like a pre-built agent, like just another AI agent that's deployed alongside GitLab and just ships by default with that configuration. But like AI agents are too open-ended. Like what Eduardo is really getting at is that AI agents are too open-ended for us to be like picking and choosing which providers we want to support, right? Like if the customer wants to build an AI agent that, you know, like interfaces with like their Salesforce data or something, like we can't really authoritatively make a decision about what LLM provider backend is best suited for that use case. And so we also need the LLM provider config to be open-ended to match the customer's needs. And primarily, like Eduardo was saying, it's like everybody just wants to use ChatGPT 4, right? So like we want to make that accessible and possible without like the business constraints that we have and the business partnerships that we have influencing those decisions.
So I think they're both great points, and I think so. The initial scope of this was, you know, the idea of, you know, whatever data customer sends, whatever requests customers send, are actually going through our API keys. They're still going to Anthropic and Vertex, and whatever we would support directly in the future. But you know, and again, this probably needs some analysis, but there may be some compliance issues with that, as opposed to providing our own key. But then the extensions that you know, Marshall and Eduardo, you're talking about, that actually might be a great next step in this feature, right? Which is to allow, you know, arbitrary models and then use this. Well, I guess the question is the integrations framework the correct place to manage those keys, or should we even be, you know, building something different? And I guess I'd kind of say that, you know, the integrations framework's quite stable, and you know, it's well known, and it's essentially reliable, and it would save us building something if we decide to take this route. But if it's not the right route, you know, let's not force ourselves into it.
Yeah, I think like using the integrations framework to me seems like it's like predicated on the assumption that the like calls to the LLM backend are happening in Rails, right? So that's like one thing that we need to pressure test a little bit is like, I think we're driving everything towards the AI gateway in the future is my understanding. And so like if you're going to do API key management over here in Rails and store those secrets in the database, now you have to like either pass those along to the AI gateway on every request, or like somehow synchronize that configuration to the AI gateway instance. And that's where it starts to break down a little bit. And now that's not to say that like the integrations framework isn't the right place to like configure your instance of AI gateway, right? Like point it to an arbitrary URI, maybe you're hosting it on Cloud Run or something, right? Like that could still make sense to me. I'm not sure API key management, like direct API key management in this interface makes sense, just because like I don't think this is the part of the application where those secrets are going to be referenced.
So does that imply, Marshall, that the API gateway will have its own UI, or already has its own UI?
No, not necessarily. I don't know, Shakar, I assume that stuff's configuration management, like is just a file on disk or something, right?
Okay.
Or environment variables.
Yeah, so the AI gate is very basic today, right? There's only one use case for it. There's one use case where all traffic for AI just goes to our models through AI gateway. And let's talk about that a little. So because I think it's good to get into the architectural discussion, just because the architecture is actually what makes this way more complicated, right? So you know, what we're saying with the integration framework is that we're going to be storing our, let's say, Anthropic API keys here, right, for a project or whatever. And that'd be great if everything is actually routed through Rails. So if you say IDE goes to Rails, always goes through a gateway, we can kind of inject those keys here, right? So we can inject those keys here, and then we can go to Anthropic or Vertex or whatever models with those keys, right? So the customer would have the keys here. We would look up, you know, the corresponding project or instance or group or whatever, and then figure out which keys to inject. Those keys will get injected, will go through the AI gateway and then to the models, right? And this is just .com we're talking about here. Now, but that's not truly how it works actually, or how we want to make it work, as Marshall alluded to. So today, only chat and code generation actually goes through this. We actually are moving code completions directly to AI gateway, and that's mostly for latency purposes. So code completions will actually go directly to AI gateway. So there's no Rails in the picture that could actually help us inject the keys. Right. And so code completions go directly to AI gateway, directly to the models. And we do this primarily for latency reduction. And there's a blueprint out there. This is not happening today, but this is how we want it to happen in the near future. And so there's no Rails in the picture. That means we can't actually inject these keys here. So then what do we do, right? That then complicates the architecture on perhaps we need to cache the keys, or, do we actually need to configure the keys in Rails at all? Do we just configure the keys here,
Okay.
which is a single source of truth. So,
but this is AI gateway you mentioned. Like, we are conflating two use cases, custom models and AI agents. They are kind of related, but not so much. For AI agents specific, I'm talking here, not custom models. For models used on AI agents. AI gateway, you mentioned the use case is all access to all GitLab features to fetch things from LLM, right? So we still could use the Rails app. Instead of calling the AI gateway, we just call whatever provider is configured, right? Instead of the main application calling the AI gateway for what it needs. This is on AI agents. I'm not talking about our GitLab feature. So,
yes, you say so you're saying for AI agents, you guys will actually route everything through Rails, and therefore it will not be a problem, right? Because it will go through this route here that we mentioned.
Yeah, it could create a separate arrow that would call OpenAI, would call whatever provider.
When I say models, these are like various providers, right? So this is for the short term, like Anthropic and Vertex, but you're right. I mean, what you're alluding to is that this could be anything, right? This could be like Hugging Face or Grok or whatever, right? So cool model.
Sheko, you touched on an alternate approach, which is so the approach that's used currently, for example, for Giddily or Workhorse is, they don't have any access to the database, and they also don't have any authentication authorization logic. Anytime they need any of those two things, they call back to Rails in an API call. So I don't think I absolutely understand the latency issue. It's going to continue to be a big issue for us, but if it's just for key management or potentially some other configuration, it can be an API. It can go, the IDE can go directly to API gateway, and when it needs the key, it can go and get it from Rails, and then there's a single source of truth for that information that's easily accessible by the customer without having them to go to server level.
Yeah, so you're saying that we would fetch the key
and cache it, and as needed.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. I mean, I'm not we need to figure out how to do that without introducing more latency, because then the point is kind of lost. But yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I think the decision was that for other projects, like for example Giddily, the decision was made to not duplicate database access, as well as authentication, authorization, single point of truth or source of truth, but also database access. Because if we start then replicating access to other places, then we have to start replicating the model layer that's in Rails. It's actually extremely complex. So there's Rails, of course, is the slowest piece in the equation anyway, but that has been the model for other parts of GitLab. Maybe we take a different approach with AI gateway, but just putting that on the table.
I think something that Shekar's already mentioned, I think something that's unique about AI Gateway is like what we're already doing with code completions, right? Like it's one of the few, if not the only services that is like exposed directly, like its APIs are exposed directly to the user. And I think that approach makes sense. I think the reasons, like the rationale makes sense why they're doing that for latency. And I don't really see a compelling reason not to double down on that methodology and start to migrate chat, code generation and AI agents to do the same thing. So like we need to test that assumption, make sure it makes sense in all use cases. But my assumption is that it does, and that we should be thinking about like how we're gonna do that, right? Because like I think another really good use case for running your own instance of AI Gateway, for example, that Shakar's illustrating now, is that you might want it to be in the same region as most of your developers, right? Like right now, I'm pretty sure if you're in like Europe, you're still hitting like a Atlanta-based AI Gateway instance. And like, I just think as soon as you need to do like bring your own keys, AI Gateway, as far as I know, is still a totally stateless service. It's super easy to like deploy on Cloud Run or something. And as a former, self-hosted admin for 3,000 users myself, I would have absolutely no problem deploying a multi-regional Cloud Run instance to manage my own API keys. I think that would be like almost simpler than anything that we could build natively in the product.
Right. Patrick, so we'll wrap it up because we are actually over time, but Patrick, you've got a point to make?
Not really a point. It was a question, and it was to have just more context about the discussion. But if we running out of time, it's okay.
Is anyone happy to go a few more minutes, or anyone need to drop off?
I'm happy to go on.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Okay, yeah, because I think because that's another whole discussion, I think, about the deploying AI Gateway, or with at least as part of self-managed, basically, because at the moment we only have one. But I guess there's another kind of edge case, which is on .com, having something in some type of configuration area, for example, what we're talking about at the start of this call, would allow customers on .com, multi-tenant customers, to bring their own API keys, right? And which we, for self-managed, it's not an issue. For dedicated, it's not an issue because they're single user instances. But again, it kind of goes back to the original question of, is this something that's of value to customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think I see that as an opportunity, right? Like, again, I don't think the barrier to entry for like self-hosting AI Gateway is that high, like, since it's a stateless service. So I think even .com customers could deploy that and maybe configure it with the integrations framework and just point it to the URL of their deployed instance. But there's also like on the product side, like I think there's an opportunity to maybe like sell that as an additional cloud connector service or something like that, right? Like if it's a bit, I don't know, it seems a bit heavy-handed for how simple it is to deploy AI Gateway. But if we're seeing customers like not want to manage that piece of the infrastructure themselves, like we could just deploy like managed instances of AI Gateway that are single tenant as well. We're going to be doing that for dedicated anyway.
Yeah, I mean, another great reason to deploy AI Gateway, is making it just part of self-managed, essentially, is customers who want to be air-gapped, or even less, significant or extreme customers who just don't want anything going to the US. I've already talked about regions, but going through GitLab essentially.
And I think like the use case for Duo is less compelling, but I think the use case like to do this for AI agents becomes like much more compelling, right? Like if you're truly building custom agents that are bespoke to your organization, I mean, like the idea with AI agents is that like you can build them to power your own applications, right? That we're like literally providing like the abstractions that are necessary for you to do like custom chat on your own website, right? And so like if you already have that level of buy-in to the feature, running your own AI Gateway to support your own like LLM apps starts to make a ton of sense. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Like for Duo Chat specifically, not a lot of bang for your buck there probably, but like when you're really leveraging agents to build applications, I think it's a drop in the bucket.
Okay, so I think we'll wrap up now. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Patrick. I think Patrick may have dropped off, but thank you, everyone. Thank you, Patrick, for taking us through how the integrations work. And I encourage everyone to continue if you have further thoughts, or continue to talk on the Epic. At this point, it doesn't seem really clear that we should be going forward with it. Doesn't seem like we should be, but if there's a feature to be implemented that we can kind of agree on those things, or I can set up another call as well. Let's do it. Otherwise, we'll kind of backlog that feature. But yeah, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. It was short notice, this call, so thank you, everyone, also for coming such short notice. And I will upload the recording. I'll just put it on YouTube. I don't think there's anything secret here. So yeah.
Just really quick, it looks like Shakar is eager to say something, so I want to give him the opportunity to do that if he has some last minute notes.
Go ahead, Shakar.
I was saying I think we should validate the customer need for this, and what is the requirement? Are there many customers saying, hey, we need to bring our own Anthropic keys for whatever, because this cool enterprise version of Anthropic is what we want to use, or so I think we should validate that the customer need for this first, and I think the integration framework could be a very quick way to bring this to bring this in. Especially if if they just want to, if customers just say, hey, we just want to bring our own key for whatever reason, right? It makes a lot of sense from like an OpenAI standpoint, because OpenAI has some excellent enterprise offerings. It's got the OpenAI Enterprise, and it also has like Azure OpenAI. So there are some brilliant enterprise offerings that offer a lot of things to enterprise customers in terms of monitoring and prompt firewalling and stuff like that. But I don't know whether that's kind of applicable here. So just to close it.
And we need to like just to be clear, validate that not necessarily just in the context of Duo, right? Because I think all the points that what was her name? Sorry, Susie.
Susie, yes.
Yep. Yeah, was bringing up around like having to do like prompt engineering like for that use case, right? Like I agree with that. It's like GPT-4 is not going to be a drop-in replacement for the like prompts that we've already built for Anthropic. So yeah, like the validation has to go beyond that. It needs to like bleed into AI agents, and that's where it gets tricky because we're just barely at an MVC right now.
And the extension of what Susie was saying is, or maybe if I can try and distill her words, is basically, if we allow customers to kind of have an arbitrary, LLM, and then for our geo features, and then the geo features don't work very well, that then comes back to GitLab. Well, your features don't work very well, right? When in fact, we can put disclaimers and everything, but we're representing those features, and so we do have some ownership of them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's like Duo Chat is no different than any other AI agent. Your first step is selecting which LLM provider you're going to use, and then you configure everything else around that, right? For so sure. I think it makes sense for Duo to target one LLM provider, because that's a product that we're building, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Okay, so thanks everyone. So yeah, really appreciate it. Great getting this group together. I will YouTube the video because there's nothing secret in here. And feel free to drop your thoughts, any further thoughts on the Epic. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Pat. Bye-bye.